Hi, I'm Dr. Martin Rutherford, certified functional medicine practitioner and chiropractor since 1979.
Dr. Randall Gates, board certified chiropractic neurologist, also a chiropractor.
Today, we're going to talk about the thin Hashimoto's patient. And I'm going to give you a little setup on this. It's something that we've been talking about doing for a long time, probably should have done a long time ago, because this is a confusing topic for the patient who has gone to their doctor, either has been diagnosed as having a thyroid problem, given medication, and is not performing well, or has gone to their doctor, has not been diagnosed with a thyroid problem, but has so many of the thyroid symptoms, then goes online and then sees this condition called Hashimoto's, looks at all of the symptoms and says, well, I have all of those except I'm not overweight. And then goes on to the next subject, and eventually then shows up in our office for a consultation, and we have what the conversation we're about to have. So Hashimoto's, I think maybe even a little bit more background, maybe take another minute or two to set this up. Hashimoto's is an immune attack against the thyroid that really is only being acknowledged by the general endocrinology community in the last, how many years? How many years has it been that I've stopped getting beat up for telling people they might have Hashimoto's? 3, 4, 5?
Probably three.
Okay,
Yeah.
3. So I'm going to give credit to my mentor, Dr. Datis Karazian, who I'm pretty sure is the guy who broke the barrier on hypothyroid, and most people who actually have hypothyroid having it caused by Hashimoto's. You can look up Datis Karazian. You can look up, why do I still have thyroid symptoms when my blood tests are normal? That was his best-selling book. It sold like 800,000 copies or something, which is like ridiculous for a book like that to sell that many copies. So that wasn't that long ago. He wrote that book like 5 years ago, maybe 6.
I'm going to say upwards of 7 to 8, because it was here when I got here.
Okay, so 7 to 8 years ago. And no one had ever heard of Hashimoto's at that point, including those of us who were treating it, had just started treating it, and still had a hard time embracing that it was as pervasive a problem as it actually is, and is now starting to be acknowledged to be. And so at first it was like we were diagnosing people with Hashimoto's, and we were being told, well, we were quacks and we were crazy and there's no such thing, and we shouldn't be dealing with this because we really weren't qualified to do this, because this was a sophisticated problem. Except we were treating patients for Hashimoto's and they were getting better and they were improving, and the medical model at the time wasn't even acknowledging that it existed. It was being called hypothyroid or subclinical hypothyroidism. I don't even know if it was called that at that point in time.
I mean, it's just hypothyroidism. You have hypothyroidism or you don't.
Yeah, exactly. People were just being told they had hypothyroidism. And the point being, hypothyroid patients
they have Hashimoto's
and overweight. And they are overweight. Hypothyroid patients are overweight. And then Dr. Karazian, because there was a lot of controversy at the time about it, and it's in the numbers on what Hashimoto's looked like in the testing were still up for debate. The lab ranges were being debated. They were all over the place. So at that time, there was even questions about the lab ranges and what lab range meant to the person that had Hashimoto's. But Dr. Karazian counseled, if you have a patient that comes into your office and they have all of the symptoms of Hashimoto's, and someone's told them they have hypothyroid and they're thin, I said that wrong. Oh, if they have all the symptoms of Hashimoto's, they come into the office, they're thin, and they've been told they have hypothyroid, and hypothyroid patients aren't thin, just know that no matter what the numbers say in the lab ranges, treat them for Hashimoto's, because they probably have Hashimoto's. So that's kind of like the background history on how difficult it's been to understand that thin people can have Hashimoto's. Now today, at that time, it was hard for doctors to even, doctors didn't even concede that people had Hashimoto's, that it even existed. it was like a multiple choice test question on our national board exam. And then that was it. It passed on, it was over. So now everybody's embracing Hashimoto's.
Mm-hmm.
The medical model for treating Hashimoto's still is medication. And Mayo Clinic still is struggling with Hashimoto's and how to approach it, if I read their communiques properly. So my issue, or brought this up, is I will now have a difficult time when patients come into me and they've been through that scenario. I have all these thyroid symptoms. I went to the doctor. My TSH was normal, so they say I don't have a thyroid problem, but I still have all these symptoms. Or my TSH wasn't normal. I actually have a hypothyroid, and they've given me the medication. It's not working, and I'm looking at a person sitting in front of me that has like 2% body fat. According to Dr. Karazian, I'm supposed to think they have Hashimoto's. Dr. Karazian was correct in that matter. So you can be thin and have Hashimoto's thyroiditis. And I have many people that come into me, and when they are struggling and they have somehow heard we work with thyroid, and they come in to do a consult, and they want to have some concept of what we might think they have, and they clearly fit that pattern of they have every symptom, but they're thin. And I tell them, you probably have Hashimoto's. I frequently get, yeah, but I've looked it up. I'm not overweight. And I must tell you, from that point on, it seems to be difficult to help that patient to understand that they can have that TSH that indicates they have hypothyroid and still be thin. So that's kind of the work up to this, and that's why we're presenting this, because for a long time it was as confusing to the doctors as it was to the patients, but now it's still confusing to the patients who have this condition, are thin, and don't know where to turn for help, because it's confusing to them, and so I'm going to have Dr. Gates remove the confusion for you. Hashimoto's is an immune attack on the thyroid.
And really what we need to point out is whether you're thin or you're overweight, let's say it this way, a high BMI, body mass index, you probably have Hashimoto's if you have hypothyroidism. By probably, I mean, the current statistics range between 70 and 95%. The gold standard physiology textbook used in pretty much most medical schools says 90%.
So if you've been told you have hypothyroidism,
right,
the percentage of probability of you having that is 70 to 95%.
High. Yeah, very, very high. If you have subclinical hypothyroidism, it's probably about around 80%. There are other more esoteric causes of hypothyroidism, like Riddell's. We're not going to go into that, but we're talking about Hashimoto's because this is the biggest piece of the pie. Now, with Hashimoto's and hypothyroidism, some patients will develop insulin resistance. Some patients will develop metabolic syndrome. I highlight these because these are conditions that are associated with increases in body mass. And you also have to consider that everyone's genetics are different in terms of what your body mass is going to be, your propensity to gain weight or not. Lots of it is based on your bacteria in your gut. Just so you know, some people are genetically resistant to having bacteria in the gut that cause obesity. Some of these people can have Hashimoto's. So in my opinion, that's really the explanation why you can be a thin patient and have Hashimoto's, and other patients have Hashimoto's and they're overweight. It's just because if you're thin, you probably have the genetics to be thin. But that doesn't mean that you don't have Hashimoto's, like Dr. Rutherford is saying, if your lab tests and your clinical findings indicate that you do.
And one of the symptoms of Hashimoto's is not being able to put on weight.
So, and that's highlight on that.
Yeah, but patients who research online, for some reason, do not seem to see that one. And I've noticed that it's always listed as the last symptom.
Yeah, excessive weight gain or inability to gain weight. And that's because you can have something called Hashitoxicosis, which a lot of Hashimoto's patients that we see present with. Lots of times early on, the immune system is attacking the thyroid, and in attacking the thyroid, not only is the thyroid dying, but at times it's releasing thyroid hormone. So you can actually kind of have a hyperthyroid presentation. You're thin, you're feeling jittery, tremulous, but you're also really fatigued. and your hair's falling out, and you don't have Graves' disease, which is the more common cause of hyperthyroidism. And so with that, you confuse your doctors and you confuse yourself, and you think, well, as Dr. Rutherford said, well, I don't have it. Well, there's a good probability you do have it, again, if your tests, your symptoms are indicating that you do. And that's the explanation for why, another explanation why you can have a thin Hashimoto's patient.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it is hard to overstate. And I'm being distracted by
You too?
Okay.
Yeah,
there's a car beeping outside of the little studio that we have here. And this is the second time it's happened. But it is difficult to overstate the complexity of Hashimoto's. I mean, we're just touching on this, or thyroid. It's difficult to overstate the complexity of thyroid. There are so many moving parts to it, and Hashimoto's kind of even is more complex than just simply trying to figure out, do you have a hypothyroid or Hashimoto's? Then once you get into Hashimoto's, as Dr. Gates says, it's associated with so many different things that can alter weight.
Mm-hmm.
And it's associated with celiac, it's associated with pernicious anemia, it's associated with polycystic ovarian syndrome, which also can help you. It can put you in the heavy category and so on and so forth. So it seems that more people are heavy. What would you put the percentage at? I generally throw out a percentage of about 80% people are overweight and can't lose the weight, and about 20% of the people are underweight and can't put it on. Because there's a metabolic abnormality there. The heavy people can't lose it, the thin people can't put it on. What would you say that the percentage?
Yeah, I would agree on that percentage.
Yeah, that's how it's. I mean, I'm just going by the number of people who come in and who we've consulted.
Yeah. But going into the complexity of Hashimoto's, that's why we've done so many broadcasts on this.
Yeah.
And many of the broadcasts we did had 50 plus references attached to them, because we were trying to detail the salient aspects of all these different things, from just how the thyroid works for most of you to understand, which I think there's a growing understanding of that out there. I mean, a lot of people are reading online regarding how the thyroid makes T4, and that T4 goes to your gut and is converted into T3, and how that circulates back to your brain for your brain to send TSH down to the thyroid. But actually, the more I think about it, so many patients still don't understand the relationship of TSH to their thyroid, because they think, oh, my TSH is high, my thyroid is high. It's actually just the opposite. It's an inverse relationship. So when your TSH is high, your thyroid is low. When your TSH is low, your thyroid is high. And then we went into at length the associations between hypothyroidism and Hashimoto's as it pertains to miscarriages, which is a really, really big topic. And then we illuminated, and these are all broadcasts we really recommend you watch if you have any a lack of clarity on these. We talked about subclinical hypothyroidism. So most medical doctors were trained to treat the thyroid as being low once the TSH went like above 6 or 8. And now there's new studies coming out that if it's over 2.85 in Korea, they're treating the thyroid. Or if it's over 3.7, you need to be on a thyroid medication, according to some research articles. So there's varying degrees of what's the correct treatment, so to speak. And then we talked about subclinical hypothyroidism as it relates to things like miscarriages and PCOS. Going further, we did a full broadcast on Hashimoto's. And you need to understand, why is your immune system attacking your thyroid? Your immune system is never supposed to attack you. We have millions of checks and balances. Unfortunately, those checks and balances are breaking down at an alarming rate in our society. And the new statistics are showing that upwards of 1 out of 3 females now has Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which is a very significant problem. And when you factor that into our societal health issues, where if you say, let's say in our experience, 80% of Hashimoto's patients are overweight, well, that could be a considerable factor to basically take into account when you're trying to help somebody lose weight.
And those are the people who go to Jenny Craig and they run 20 miles a day, or they bike 20 miles a day, or they run, they walk, they eat 1,500 calories, and it won't come off.
Right. Working out with the personal trainer.
Working out with the personal trainer, gaining weight, exactly.
Yeah.
Because you're over-exercising and creating stress on your system.
Yeah. And then we have the causes of Hashimoto's, which typically boil down to food intolerances in the gut. So this whole leaky gut phenomena, watch our broadcast on that, but food molecules can permeate through the intestines, gluten and dairy have the most notoriety. We find upwards of 10 to 20 different foods that can be associated with this. The immune attacks those foods, the immune system attacks those foods, and then the immune system attacks the thyroid. Then it came out in 2012 that 80% of Hashimoto's patients have human herpes virus 6 living in their thyroid. Then it came out in 2015, they found Epstein-Barr virus in 80% of Hashimoto's patients. And another study showed that there's Vibrio viruses in the thyroid. So it's thought to be that there's this immune dysregulation where the immune system is killing the thyroid. Is it trying to get to the viruses, or is it just so incompetent that it's killing the thyroid and it's not seeing the viruses? And then stress also is discussed and how that can be a triggering factor, so to speak, for autoimmune thyroid disease. So that's kind of the overview of Hashimoto's that we want you to understand. We're going to go a little deeper now and explain, okay, let's say you're a thin patient, now you've been tested, you see signs that you have Hashimoto's, you see that you fulfill the criteria for having it, but what are the other ramifications of this illness? I don't know if you wanted to impart anything there before I...
Because I have Hashimoto's?
Yeah, before I go on my diatribe.
Practical ramifications of, you mean like fatigue?
Yeah, having Hashimoto's, yeah, like what do you experience? Because you're not overweight. What do you experience as a Hashimoto's patient?
Well, but it's funny because I think I had Hashimoto's. I think I was affected by Hashimoto's when I was 21 years old because I got mono. And from that point on, what I experienced for almost 29 years was I had to fight my weight, whereas prior to having mono, I didn't. Mono is caused by Epstein-Barr virus. Epstein-Barr virus, as Dr. Gates just said, was one of the things that causes Hashimoto's. I also started to become more tired. My energy levels went down. Well, I figured, well, I was 22, I'm old age. This is coming on, so I have to exercise. I was able to control it at that point in time. But then when everything blew up on me, I was under a lot of stress, and I got pneumonia, fatigue, joint pain. I think I might have had celiac most of my life, but I had no doubt that I had it at this point in time. It kind of blew up. Food sensitivity, seborrheic dermatitis, hair thinning, eyebrows thinning, very fatigued, a lot of joint pain, kind of like having to pick myself up to go to work all the time. So Hashimoto's, and we don't, and an immune attack against my thyroid. So I put on weight. I was surprised. One day I went to sit in a chair and I was like, this chair is getting a little tight. And then I really had to start working at my weight, and I was able to put it down. But the point was I wasn't eating anymore. So I put the weight on. My shins started flaking. I mean, I had all the classic symptoms of Hashimoto's, and really didn't know until I got involved with Dr. Karazian. And so Hashimoto's is something that probably is not completely understood yet, because since that time we've seen that it can be it can cause cerebellar issues, dizziness, vertigo, balance. It can affect your ears. It can affect Meniere's. It can cause Meniere's disease. For those of you who have maybe had Meniere's disease and an autoimmune attack on your inner ear, and then you get dizziness and you lose your hearing. I think it can cause pernicious anemia.
What's associated with
it, polycystic ovarian syndrome. If you have Hashimoto's, you have like a 60% chance of getting celiac, and on and on.
I don't know if it's that high. It's the other way around. If you have gluten antibodies, there's huge proportion.
I do think there's something both ways, because it seems like when I looked it up, they were like, I was like, why is it that 60% of people who have maybe celiac and get Hashimoto's?
Right, exactly.
But such a percentage of Hashimoto's only gets so much celiac or whatever. But there's a relationship there. And
gluten sensitivities are very high. So maybe
gluten
that's
sensitivities
very high in the Hashimoto's patient population.
And all of those
15% of the population has celiac. Non-celiac.
And again, just to go back, just in general, just imagine how all those things can affect your physiology. And some people are going to gain weight and not be able to lose it. And some people are going to lose weight and not be able to put it on. So, I mean, we look at these things as a one-to-one relationship. Oh, I have this, so everything should be exactly the same. But I mean, no two of our patients are the same. No two Hashimoto's patients who walk through here have the same issues as far as addressing the immune response to calm the immune response down against Hashimoto's. So you wanted to explain euthyroid Hashimoto's?
I think that pretty much, well, within this context, so you can have Hashimoto's and you don't necessarily have to have hypothyroidism.
Right.
So a lot of people need to get that. And that's a growing proportion of the population as well. So we have a lot of patients who are confused on that matter, and they take their blood test and their doctor and they say, well, you don't have hypothyroidism, so you don't need to worry about it. Now that is not consistent with the current literature, because hopefully you're kind of seeing how Hashimoto's is the canary in the coal mine for so many different disorders. The canary in the coal mine is the old example of a miner would take a little bird down into the mine, and
yeah, I didn't mention fibromyalgia and
right, I was going to go into
fatigue.
that. And then if the bird dies, then that means there's bad gas down there and the miner needs to get out of there. Well, Hashimoto's is kind of the first thing to happen when these other disorders are starting to evolve in our experience. So it's kind of the canary, so to speak, because it is associated with, as you said, polycystic ovarian syndrome, huge associated with fibromyalgia, associated with chronic fatigue, associated with certain types of peripheral neuropathy in our experience, associated with depression. And we're just talking about Hashimoto's independent of thyroid hormone levels, associated with the gut, associated with pernicious anemia, as you're saying. So all these different things, and what they're finding is that these immune cells to the thyroid have cross-reactivity to other tissues in the body. So a little immune cell that's killing the thyroid, well, let's say your cerebellum, which is your balance center, kind of looks like the thyroid. So these thyroid immune cells start killing your cerebellum. And they also find that these thyroid antibodies are associated with other quote unquote neural antigens. This is kind of the new discovery. So now once you have thyroid antibodies, you're probably making antibodies to your brain, which is hugely important for any patient who's trying to recover from post-concussion syndrome and they have an immune attack on their thyroid. You want to factor that in because maybe their poor recovery is because their brain is attacking, their immune system is attacking their brain. So all these different features are now being explained in the current research, whereas before patients just said, well, I have Hashimoto's, I don't really know how that relates. Well, now we know it intricately relates to so many of these different
Dr.
problems.
Karazian back in the day, he said, when I was first doing this and I wasn't, he said, you have to, everybody walks in your office testing for Hashimoto's. Now, even though I had it, and even though he helped me to understand that I had it, and I couldn't embrace that. I could not embrace the concept that it was that widespread back then. Okay, this was way before anybody was even talking about Hashimoto's or even had heard of it. And he's saying like, wow, this is like, anybody comes into you for any kind of a chronic condition, look for Hashimoto's. And it was just like mind blowing. And then I started communicating with one of his colleagues, isn't in between, Don, if you're out there. And one day I said, Don, I call Dr. Karazian and tell him here's what's going on and blah, blah, blah. And I get this message back from Dr. Karazian. If you don't test everybody that walks in the door with a chronic problem for Hashimoto's thyroiditis, I'm not, don't even talk to me or any of my people anymore. So I was like in shock, and I did it. I tested the next 10 people who came in for Hashimoto's. I was trying to save people money at the time. We weren't totally sure where we were going with this whole chronic pain thing. We knew autoimmunity was a big part. So I tested the next 10 people and 8 had it. 7 had it. And then retested one of them like a couple of weeks later because it just seemed like they would, and they had it. So it was like 8 out of 10 had it. To go to your comment of how widespread
it's really widespread.
It's crazy. So widespread.
Well,
and that's not the people who came in. That's of our patient population who was sick.
That's true. And the last thing I want to touch on is the criteria for defining Hashimoto's is changing. So even when I got into clinical practice, we were looking at labs that said, if the thyroid peroxidase antibody, that's one of 2 immune cells we look at to see if somebody has Hashimoto's. If that value is over 100, they have Hashimoto's. And that value has since went down to 60, 50, 34 by LabCorp. Now many labs are saying anything over 9, including the Mayo Clinic, including both hospitals here in Reno. In fact, one hospital says 8.9, the other says 9. Same unit of measurement. And so from that creates a lot of confusion because if you have a thyroid peroxidase antibody over 9 in this office, we're looking at it as Hashimoto's thyroiditis based on the new criteria.
And there's still labs at 32.
Yeah, and 34.
Which creates
a lot of confusion, especially if your thyroid hormones are normal. So you have to consider all of this in the broad scheme of things, whether you have fibromyalgia, whether you have pernicious anemia, whether you have chronic fatigue syndrome, whether you have a weight problem, whether you have depression, whether you have polycystic ovarian syndrome. Evaluating a person for Hashimoto's, independent of what your TSH value is and your thyroid hormones, is highly, highly, highly important. So that's the take-home point.
Yeah,
and yes, you can be thin with all that going on.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
All these factors, depending on which ones are involved in your case, dictate heavy, can't lose weight, thin, can't put it on.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Okay, so if you need more information, go to powerhealthtalk.com. Go to the webpage. There's a search tab. You can search Hashimoto's. You can search hypothyroidism. You can search whatever condition we just brought up. We probably have a video on it. And there's references on that webpage below the video. And so you can access those references if you want to, if you're pedantic like I am. And then we'll be back next week with an exciting topic, and we'll see you then.